YouTube family, welcome to Qué Golazo. Make sure to smash like and subscribe as we look ahead to Derby d'Italia with silverware on the line. Vamos! With the Scudetto in AC Milan's hands, the other two-thirds of Italy's big three square off, looking for Calcio's other major piece of hardware, the Coppa Italia. In one corner, a Juventus side looking to correct the narrative around the disappointing league campaign. And in the other, an Inter Milan side looking to secure at least one trophy as its Serie A title hopes appear to be fading away. I've got Jonathan Johnson and Dre Cordero returns to break it all down. The Qué Golazo Coppa Italia final preview begins right now. Hey everybody, welcome to Qué Golazo Pod on Twitter, youtube.com/Qué Golazo CBS Sports and your CBS Sports app. Welcome to our Coppa Italia final preview, which you can watch exclusively on Paramount Plus and CBS Sports, of course. Jonathan Johnson, how are you, buddy?
Hey, doing very well, thanks. And yourself? Look, the hat's back again. I'm not going to take it off until Vans come and offer me some like light blue pastel colored shoes for the summer.
You stick to those guns, Jonathan Johnson. I'm wearing the snapback too. And we got an Inter Miami snapback, and Dre Cordero returns. Dre, how are you, buddy?
I'm good. It's a fitted, though. We got a little slight correction. It's a fitted. We got U.S. Open Cup for Inter Miami today, so a little represent. Men in hats on the podcast.
I love it. Fitted caps are also welcome here, of course. But welcome, Dre Cordero. Welcome, Jonathan Johnson. Welcome, everybody. Please subscribe. Please share as we have our Coppa Italia preview. Serie A is winding down, and obviously part of that narrative is the Coppa Italia, which you can watch exclusively on Paramount Plus and CBS Sports. Of course, Juventus against Inter Milan on Wednesday. Dre Cordero will be there, as well as the entire CBS Sports team as well. All right, let me just set this off straight away. Okay, Dre Cordero and JJ, please jump in. But Dre, who needs this more?
Yeah, as long as we don't ask who wants it more, right? Like we could do like some pukey sports cliches, but not all the pukey sports cliches. So in terms of who needs it more, I actually have zero doubts that it's Juve. Inter Scudetto from last season still has credit. Inter are taking their title defense down to the very last round of the season against Milan. They're not in any way out of it. They've already won a trophy this season. They beat Juventus with that last-minute Alexis Sanchez 121st minute game winner in the Supercoppa Italia. And so, without a doubt, it's Juventus who needed more, because we're comparing Allegri's Juve to Pirlo's Juve, right? And at the beginning of the season, they thought, well, Allegri's back because Juve are going to rediscover their DNA. Well, they're going to finish the season guaranteed with fewer points and fewer trophies in Pirlo's Juve last season. And so, for that reason, this is as much of a must-win as Juventus have.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think that this is huge for Juventus because I think many people feel a bit more positively about Juve now than they did at sort of the midway point of the season, because quite a bit has happened since then. You know, they signed Vlahovic, their form has improved, so they're sort of up there much higher than they were at the beginning of the campaign. And a trophy now, I think, would paper over quite a few of the cracks which we saw exposed during the first half of that campaign. So I agree with you. I'm in no doubt that Juve absolutely need this. And I think that when people sort of take a step back and analyze the rest of the season, I still think that the post-mortem of Juve's campaign is going to be quite damning regardless.
Well, I'm glad that both of you said Juventus, because that's exactly where we begin as we analyze and preview this game. In terms of Max Allegri and the way that he'll approach this game, how do you feel, Dre, he will approach it? Obviously, Max is not exactly known for experimenting a lot with formations and strategy, but how do you think he'll do this against Inter Milan?
Yeah, I mean, he'll change shapes and different, try different systems here and there. But what he won't change is sort of the principles of play that Juventus play with, and that's always going to be sort of defensive first. Now, not from the very start. Like, people have this concept of Catenaccio as like defending from the opening whistle and having 10 guys hanging off the crossbar. No, they go after it early on, especially with guys like Vlahovic, Morata, Dybala. It's once they take that 1-0 lead where they really tend to close things up at the back. And I think to their detriment, instead of going out and chasing an insurance goal to go up 2-0, they're just trying to sort of defend that 1-0. So I expect for Juve to be aggressive at the start, I expect them to try and play in the opposition's half at the beginning of the game. But if they do take the lead, then it's just as predictable as anything. Allegri likes to get his team to sit back 2 lines of 4 and try and hold on to that lead, which sometimes works. And for Juventus, for many years, worked to the tune of many Coppa Italia and Serie A trophies. It's not necessarily getting the job done this year.
Yeah, he's not exactly known as swashbuckling Max Allegri, but I mean, I think there's an added importance to this game for Juve as well. There is a real need to win, like I said earlier, because it probably will be their only trophy success this season. But also, I think as well, it's going to be a farewell for guys like Chiellini as well. So, it's a chance for them to sign off with some semblance of success, despite the fact that this Juve side remains a work in progress. I mean, I think it's going to take until some point next season, probably sort of like from the second quarter onwards, to really start seeing the best of Vlahovic, as Juve try and work out exactly the best way to sort of build around him and get him the kind of service that he needs to thrive in the same way that we've seen at Fiorentina. And I'm curious as well what happens this summer with Dybala. He's been linked with Inter as well. Is there going to be a little bit of needle starting there? Is this going to be his final game? Maybe his final contribution for Juve is to get one over on Inter before he makes that switch this summer.
Dre, let me ask you something, because Jonathan Johnson spoke of 2 players, which I was very happy he brought them in, because it was the segue that I wanted to continue. And one of them was Dusan Vlahovic. He was subbed off against that loss against Genoa. He didn't look happy, but then Max Allegri said it was more he wasn't happy at his performance instead of the fact that he was subbed off. And Max Allegri said, actually, technically speaking, it was his best game or one of his best games, etc. What do you make of Dusan Vlahovic towards, I guess now, I mean, I'm reading a few other things as well that goals per ratio are better actually under Juventus than they were at Fiorentina. But do you think, do you have Dusan Vlahovic right now playing with Juventus what you expected when he joined in January?
It's still a fairly small sample size, right? We're talking about 13 Serie A games that he's played, 6 goals. It's not a bad haul. It's not as if he's gone in this 10-game goal drought. And what's wrong with Dusan Vlahovic? The thing is, the first half of the season when he was at Fiorentina, he was lighting it up almost to the tune of a goal per game. It's honestly, his numbers were like Cristiano Ronaldo, Messi-esque the first half of the year with Fiorentina, who, by the way, have a very different style, who play much closer to the opposition's goal, who press much more and more effectively than Juventus does, who will attack whether they're up 2-0 or down 3-0. And so all of these things are going to sort of play into how many chances Vlahovic is getting, whether he's creating them for himself, whether his teammates are creating them for him. So I'm not extremely concerned with Vlahovic's form at the moment, but he's not the same player that he was at Fiorentina. It's worth noting, though, that that's the only time in his career that he's ever been that good and that prolific as a goal scorer was the first half of the season with the Viola under Vincenzo Italiano, who's come into Fiorentina and changed their style and made them more dynamic and more exciting despite a late season struggle. So it's not a bad haul, 6 goals in 13 games. It's just not the 17 and 21 that he had for Fiorentina earlier in the season. The problem is that this is a Coppa Italia final and they need him at his best moment right now. And he's on a 4-game goal drought, which is matching his longest goal drought of the season in all competitions. He's done that twice now, both times with Juventus. The last time was in March. You could also make the case that he's due to score, right? Because he hasn't gone more than 4 games without a goal at any point this season.
Yeah, I agree with Dre. I think it's going to take a bit longer before we can actually really judge, Vlahovic and Juve and how this is as a fit. I mean, I think it's easy to forget as well how difficult it is for signing to adapt to a new team midway through the season, especially one that had been built up around him in such a short space of time. Because when Italiano came in as Fiorentina coach, Fiorentina were basically doing everything they could to convince Vlahovic to not move on, to not push for a transfer. They managed to keep him, had a great first half of the season, and we've seen how difficult it's been for them in the after Vlahovic period, since the winter transfer window. And despite the fact that, he hit the ground running with a couple of goals, notably the great effort against Villarreal in the Champions League, there were always going to be a few teething issues, I think, with this kind of transfer. And like I said, it's going to need that full preseason with his new teammates and, Allegri really being able to work out what is the best system in order for Juve to get the best out of him long term.
JJ, you mentioned, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, it's not a team full of playmakers either, right? You mentioned the team being sort of built around him at Fiorentina and sort of catered to learning how to play with him. One of the major issues that Juve have had this season is that, with the exception of Paulo Dybala, who has been sometimes injured, who hasn't always been in the lineup, there aren't a lot of guys there who are creating a ton of chances for everybody else. You look at a team like Inter, and Dumfries and Perisic are guys that on the wing, through crosses, through dribbling, create a ton. You look at their midfield with someone like a Barella, who can provide, some playmaking as well. Juve don't really have that. They have sort of a workman-like midfield, given, some of the absences they've had. I think Weston McKennie is a guy who can sometimes give you that, in the final third, winning the ball back and giving it to other really talented players to score. Juventus lack that with Rabiot and Zakaria and, that Betancourt goal. They don't really have a team that is going to surround Vlahovic with a ton of playmakers right now.
JJ, you mentioned Giorgio Chiellini there, obviously 37 years old, a staple of not just Juventus football, but Italian football as well. Reports of Fabrizio Romano, maybe MLS might be an interest. Any updates there?
None that I know of personally, but I've seen the same reports as you. And to be honest, it would make sense. I mean, I don't know where a potential landing spot would be. It sounds like Toronto are going to be very Italian infused as of this summer. When you've got guys like Insigne going there, I think Criscito has been lined up for them as well. But I think Chiellini, sort of having one last blast in MLS, I can understand him looking at that. If I'm being totally honest, I wouldn't understand as much the MLS sides looking at him, given his age, especially given his recent injury history as well. I mean, I feel like, obviously hindsight's a wonderful thing, but if Chiellini could have looked back as to how things would play out over the last 12 months or so, I wonder if he might have actually thought about hanging up his boots after Italy's success in the Euros, because Italy and sort of players like Chiellini, Bonucci as well, approaching that point of his career as well. They're guys who, it's going to be difficult for them to go out on much more of a high than that success with the Azzurri. And obviously, at international level, they're going out on a major failure, having failed to reach the World Cup. So for Chiellini, I can understand why he'd be looking at his options to get maybe 1 or 2 maximum seasons out of the rest of his career. But I don't understand the MLS clubs who'd be looking to bring him in on significant wages, and make him a really important part of their defense, especially given how injury prone he has become in the last couple of years.
Yeah, Dre, what do you think? Even if you were to take a severe, massive pay cut, it's still not one that makes a ton of sense, in my opinion, for MLS teams. And I don't want to ever doubt Giorgio Chiellini, because he's an absolute champion. He's just quite literally a legend of Italian football. And he's done it for so long, but he's gone from a guy who averaged 37 games a season to a guy who's now playing less than 25 per year. And that's in Serie A, where the travel is not the same, where the conditions are going to be a lot more amicable to him. You think about MLS, 3 T's, right? Travel, temperature, and turf. You're going to be moving around a lot more than you would be in Serie A. The temperatures are going to vary drastically the way that they don't in Italy, and some of the plastic pitches you have to play on, which could deal with some injuries, especially for a veteran player. Add to that the fact that if he was a goal scorer, a super sub that you could bring in, who's going to guarantee you goals, that would make a little bit more sense. Center backs don't make the most terrific super subs, and so I failed to see how Chiellini would make a ton of sense, other than from a marketing perspective, for any Major League Soccer team to make any sort of significant investment in him. I'd like to see it, just because I want to see talent in the league, but I would be very surprised if it were to work out.
I mean, I guess one counter argument to that is perhaps, how close he's been getting with Weston McKennie over the last couple of months. I mean, we saw in that documentary that they, had sort of a bit of chit chat going on. And, if Chiellini can actually communicate clearly in English and strongly, then there is a case to be made that a team, you guys would know MLS teams better than me, but maybe a team lacking in leadership who really needs somebody who's been there, done that pretty much every level in European football, who could come in and perhaps benefit them over the course of 18 months or so. But I think there are probably a very finite number of options in MLS in terms of landing spots for that kind of profile.
The travel would absolutely destroy him. I'm just going to tell you that right now. All right, let's move to Inter Milan right now. Let's discuss. Obviously, Inzaghi had a job to do after Antonio Conte left Inter Milan, and now Jonathan Johnson, Inter Milan face Juventus. First of all, is this it for them? What do you make of, obviously, their fading chances of winning Serie A? Can they still hold on to that? Should they put all this focus on this game? Obviously, you can, walk and chew gum at the same time. How do you see Inter Milan as they face Juventus in this game?
Yeah, I mean, I think Inter will still feel like their title hopes in Serie A are alive. If I had to judge Milan and Inter's run-in on the remaining fixtures, I'd say that Milan's is tougher, especially the game. The next round of matches. I think they'll probably determine the way that this title goes. But it's not dead for Inter at this moment in time. I mean, the fate of their season is kind of semi in their own hands. If they win this game, obviously they pick up silverware, and if they win the remaining two, there's a decent chance, that they may well end up closing the gap at the very last minute on Milan. All they can do is go out there, try and win every game, and that will put the maximum amount of pressure on Milan. And obviously, beating Juventus here would guarantee them some silverware. It's worked out much better than I expected it to under Inzaghi. I really wasn't hot on Inter at the beginning of the season. They impressed me quite early on, went through that kind of blip, around winter, and then really came on strong and have emerged as, one of the better teams over the course of the entire campaign. So, kudos to Inzaghi and the rebuilding job that they've done there. I still don't know where this leaves Inter in terms of sort of long-term sustained success. I mean, if they can use the transfer market wisely and pick up, really talented free agents like a Dybala, for example, if that does happen, then I guess there is some hope, certainly in terms of domestic success. I mean, another positive was the way that they went out of the Champions League as well. They have shown that they're starting to learn a bit and adapt to being in Europe. Could be a real boon for Calcio next season if Milan are able to do the same as well. But for me, I think a lot is still going to depend on the ownership model at Inter. If there's going to be any more financial problems, if this squad is going to be gutted every season. So, I mean, I think Inzaghi, will have merited some silverware if he does end up picking up the Coppa Italia here. But, I still think that Milan are obviously slight favourites given that 2-point advantage that they have in Serie A. So, I think, this is probably the realistic silverware that they can target.
Yeah, and they do have a trophy already this season, right? Which is the Supercoppa. It meant a little bit more because it was the Derby d'Italia edition of the Supercoppa, and they won it in such dramatic fashion again with that stoppage time, extra time, Alexis Sanchez game winner. But the Supercoppa is not a major trophy, right? And it's not what Inter is setting out to win. They want to win Italian Cups. They want to win Scudetti. And I agree with Jonathan. They're still very much in the hunt for the Scudetto. But it's not just a 2-point gap. It's a 2-point gap and the tiebreaker, which effectively makes it a 3-point gap with Milan. Milan's magic number is 4. Milan pick up 4 points from the remaining 2 games, and Milan are champions. That said, the remaining 2 games are really tough. They're playing Atalanta this weekend. Atalanta is still chasing a European spot. They close out at Sassuolo. Sassuolo really won't likely have anything to play for in that match. But if you look at the way that Sassuolo have played against the big teams in Serie A, they almost take it as a point of pride when they go up against Juve, Inter, Milan, Napoli. They've gotten wins over most, if not all of those teams this season. We'll have to see their level of motivation against the Milan team that are trying to win the Scudetto. Obviously, advantage Rossoneri there. But they're still in it. It's not as if, we can play your subs in this Coppa Italia final so that you can have a chance, maybe if Milan slips, to take the Scudetto. You basically roll the dice with your best players for the remaining 3 games they have this season and see if you can win as many trophies as possible. That said, I think Inzaghi's grade is a passing grade, right? Like if I'm judging Inzaghi's season and I'm comparing his Inter to Conte's Inter, it's probably like a B+ for Inzaghi. They were brilliant the first half of the year. I thought every bit as good, if not better than Conte's. In fact, they were on better pace than Conte's Inter through the first 19 rounds. The difference was last year, Inter second half of the year were historically good. Inter picked up 50 points in just the back half of the season last year. That's a 100-point pace. That's historically good for Serie A standards. So I didn't think they were going to be able to match that the second half of the year. I had questions about whether they were going to be able to keep the pace that they had through the first 19 rounds. And the answer is they haven't, because of that little blip that JJ mentioned in the winter. It still has been very, very good. It's not even been sort of top 3 in MLS. If you look at the table just since the midpoint of the campaign, Milan, Juve, and Napoli have all been better than Inter in terms of picking up points. And Inter have actually been closer to Verona, who are currently 9th in the table, than they have been to Milan, who are their sort of Scudetto rivals. So Inzaghi gets a passing grade. I think the team was constructed in such a way that he could sort of just step in and implement his style of football. At Lazio, he played a 3-5-2. It's a bit of a more fluid, more dynamic team than it was under Conte, not quite as rigid, more proactive. I think they're getting more from like the likes of Dumfries and Perisic out wide. And what they've done is, instead of, signing one guy, like Dzeko wasn't expected to come in and fill the volume of goals that Romelu Lukaku got them last season. It wasn't a like for like swap in that sense. It was more goals by committee. And Inter have goals this season from virtually every single field player on the squad. Even Brozovic has scored, I think, twice in all competitions. So it's been a team performance. I think they've been more than the sum of their parts for not having a Lukaku, for not having a Cristiano, for not having a guy they can depend on to score, 20 plus goals. I think Lautaro is as close to that as it gets. So if they do finish second on the season, get to the Coppa Italia final, or win the Coppa Italia final, win the Supercoppa, there's a lot of positives for Inzaghi's first season in Inter, and there's a lot there to build on.
All right, so let's finish up with key matchups as we conclude Coppa Italia. Inter Milan facing Juventus. Obviously, they met earlier in April. It was a slim 1-0 victory for Inter Milan with a Çalhanoğlu penalty in the stoppage time in the first half as well. Obviously, there was a 3-5-2 formation for Inter Milan, and then that conventional statistic, Vlahovic in front of Dybala, Morata, Cuadrado. What do you expect? What key matchups can we see in this game? Will it be more of a goal fest, Drake Cordero? Will we see a similar result, maybe going into extra time? What do you think? Inter Milan, Juventus, key matchups.
Yeah, in terms of like actual head-to-head matchups, players that'll sort of be in each other's space, I think the wide areas are where Inter do the most damage, again, with Perisic and Dumfries. And so that means that Danilo and Alexandro, or whether it's Pellegrini that gets to start on the left for Juve, those wide matchups are going to be, I think, where the game is won or lost for both teams. But beyond just, players going head-to-head in this match, I think there's these great storylines or points of comparison between players, right? Because Vlahovic is arguably the best young player in Serie A. Rafael Leao maybe has a shout. So Vlahovic against Lautaro, right? The two premier goal scorers for these two teams. Lautaro Martinez, despite all the critics, despite being a bit of a streaky goal scorer, is going to close out the season having, performed admirably, 23 goals in all competitions, 23 in 46 games, I think, in all competitions. Two of the best young defenders in Serie A are going to be featured in this cup final. Matthijs de Ligt has become just an every game starter for Juve, has taken that spot after some initial criticism, and they need him because of the likes of, Chiellini on his way out, Bonucci getting up there in years. And Bastoni, I think, is the sort of top young Italian center back. So you got De Ligt and Bastoni, Vlahovic and Lautaro, Dybala's sort of last hurrah. It's a lot of really good storylines. And I look for Edin Dzeko as a guy who's probably going to start. They've been rotating who starts alongside Lautaro Martinez all season. But the fact that it's at the Stadio Olimpico, it's a bit of a homecoming for Edin Dzeko, who spent so much time playing there for Roma, means he probably starts alongside Lautaro.
I mean, I think as well, when I'm really intrigued when I look at this as to who might come out on top in the midfield battle, because, I mean, I know he's much maligned, Adrien Rabiot, but he is a guy who, on his day, is capable of changing the way that a team looks in terms of the midfield.
Can you say that again? Can you just say his name again?
Adrien Rabiot. You got to get the H sounding R. It's it's a very French thing.
It's
I know.
Sexy, Jonathan Johnson. It's sexy. Adrien Rabiot.
I mean, honestly, it helps if you're like a 10-pack a day smoker, and then like you really get the pronunciation going. But no, I mean, Rabiot is a player who I was hugely disappointed with the way that his career ended up at PSG, but I know what he can give a team on his day. And it frustrates me to see that he's not been able to sort of translate that from what he did at his best with PSG to Juventus. I do think that he's a player still worth persevering with. And it's this kind of match, if he can, deliver and help to really stabilize that midfield, to really dominate it up against a very challenging Inter Milan unit. You've got guys like Barella, but you've got Brozovic as well, guys that I don't think that he really has to feel inferior to. But I do think that time is now pressing for him to really show what he can do and what everybody knows that he can do, because he's a player who's been linked with so many clubs before he moved on. And I think, that midfield battle could be crucial to deciding this match.
All righty. Well, let's finish up with predictions. Give me some quick predictions here. Obviously, when you call a game and you're a play-by-play guy, it's almost like you're walking on fire, Drake Cordero. Yeah. So I understand, your hesitancy, but what do you think?
I'm glad you said it. I was going to say, but I'll break the rule. I'll go ahead and make the prediction anyway. I think Inter are the better side. I think line for line, with the exception of their center forward. They're better. I think they have the best back three in Serie A. Tefrey, Skriniar, and Bastoni, who I mentioned before. Those guys get involved in the attack as well. They're not just defenders. The wide areas are terrific. The best midfield trio, arguably, in Serie A as well. And so they're the better team. They should be favorites. My prediction is Inter 1-0.
All right, JJ?
Yeah, I mean, I'd have to say that I agree with that. I think that Inter are the more solid of the two teams. And like I said, I think that Juve is still a work in progress because, I think that Allegri is going to need to change so much more if he's going to get something out of this team long term. But, I think as well, Juve will have that motivational factor of knowing that this is their only opportunity to potentially salvage something from the season. I think it's going to be pretty tight. I can see this finishing level after 90 minutes.
Yeah, I think I'm going for an Inter win as well. And I think as well it's going to be tight and go to extra time. But we will see. Coppa Italia final on Wednesday. Coverage starts at 2 p.m. Eastern. CBS Sports Network, Paramount Plus, Drake Correra, Matteo Bonetti. I'm sure Poppy Miller, Mike Grella, Marco Messina, they're all going to be there. Should be fantastic. Drake Correra, thank you so much for being here, my friend. Final word, final thoughts. Thanks again.
Yeah, this is an absolute blast. This late stage in the season where, Italy has 6-7 really good teams, and every single weekend we're doing these incredible games with a ton of goals. We just did Verona Milan last week on Sunday. It was terrific. Monday Fiorentina Roma was a ton of fun. Now I get to call the Coppa Italia Wednesday. I'm having way too much fun, and somehow they decided to pay me for this. So
I know somebody better tell HR because this is just not even fair. Jonathan Johnson, thanks so much, buddy.
Guys, thanks a lot for having me on. Always a pleasure. Great to finally connect with Dre on this after a long time working together over multiple networks. So this has been really fun.
I love it. From New York City to Miami to Paris, you can't get better than that. Say it again, John. Say it again, Jonathan Johnson. Adrien Rabiot. Go on.
Adrien Rabiot.
Oh, I love it. I'm going to WhatsApp you
so good.
so many things right now. All right, everybody. Thank you so much. Coppa Italia on Wednesday. Paramount Plus. Drake Cordero. You can follow him at Drake Cordero on Twitter, of course. John_Le Gossip. LMH Garay. CBS Sports app. Qué Golazo Pod on Twitter. We got plenty more to come from Qué Golazo, including the North London Derby, as well as weekend preview and so much more. Thank you so much. Have a great rest of your week, and we will see you next time. Till then.